If you ever wondered what happens when French gentlemen get tired of just talking about honor and decide to kick each other in the face about it, congratulations. You've stumbled onto the most elegant beatdown in history. Because while the rest of the world was throwing haymakers like cavemen, the French said, non, 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 and invented a martial art so sophisticated it makes other fighting styles look like a bar brawl at a truck stop. This is Savate, and if you think it's just fancy footwork, you're about to find out why sailors, street thugs, and actual duel-loving aristocrats all agreed this was the most respectful way to absolutely ruin someone's afternoon. The story starts in the gutters of Paris in the early 1800s, and I mean that literally. We're talking about a time when the streets smelled like a nightmare, disease was speedrunning the population, and your average Tuesday could involve watching someone get stabbed over a baguette. The working class, sailors, dock workers, street merchants, they didn't have boxing gyms or kung fu dojos. What they had was anger, cheap wine, and a whole lot of shoes. And somewhere between dodging horse carriages and avoiding the plague, these dudes figured out that if you're going to fight in narrow alleyways where there's barely room to throw a punch, you might as well use your feet. The original practitioners called it la savate, which literally just means old shoe. Not the most intimidating name until you realize that old shoe is about to rearrange your dental plan. Here's where it gets wild. These weren't organized fights with rules and referees. This was pure survival capitalism. Street fighters would challenge each other for money, reputation, or sometimes just because someone looked at them wrong. And the technique? Imagine if every kick had the energy of someone who just found out their girlfriend left them for a baker. Low kicks to sweep you, high kicks to concuss you, and everything in between delivered with the kind of spite that only comes from living in a city where the sewer system was more of a suggestion. But here's the thing that separated Savate from just being angry French soccer. These fighters started developing actual technique. They realized that just swinging your leg like a drunk flamingo wasn't going to cut it when the other guy knows what he's doing. So they got scientific with it. Precision over power, angles over aggression. It was chess, except every wrong move meant waking up horizontal. Enter Michel Casseux, the man who basically said, what if we made street violence classy? In 1825, this absolute legend opened the first official Savate school in Paris, and suddenly the art of kicking someone's soul out became a legitimate sport. Casseux wasn't just teaching people how to throw feet, he was teaching them philosophy. He believed that Savate should be graceful, controlled, almost artistic. Which is hilarious when you think about it. Imagine someone getting knocked out and the crowd's like, yes, but did you see the form? Magnifique. But that's exactly what happened. Casseux cleaned up the technique, added defensive movements, footwork that would make a ballet dancer jealous, and most importantly, he made it respectable. Rich people started learning it, actual nobility. The same dudes who would duel with swords at dawn were now learning how to roundhouse kick in the evening. But the real game changer was Charles Lecour. This man looked at Savate and thought, you know what this needs? Punching. See, Lecour got humbled, and I mean humbled, by an English boxer in 1832. Got his French pride absolutely demolished in front of everyone. And instead of retiring to a monastery and contemplating his failures, he did what any reasonable person would do. He learned boxing, combined it with Savate, and created something even deadlier. He called it boxe française or French boxing, and now you had fighters who could punch like the English and kick like the French. It was like giving a sniper a shotgun. Suddenly, Savate wasn't just effective, it was versatile. You could fight at any range. You could jab, cross, hook, and then just casually throw a kick to the liver that makes someone question their life choices. The evolution didn't stop there. Savate schools started popping up all over France like Starbucks in a gentrified neighborhood. Each school had its own style, its own techniques, its own beef with other schools. Rivalries formed, grudges were held. And because French people can't do anything without making it extra, they turned these rivalries into spectacles. Public matches drew massive crowds. We're talking thousands of people showing up to watch two dudes in formal attire try to kick each other's heads off. And the fashion? Chef's kiss. Saboteurs fought in tight-fitting jackets and shoes. Actual shoes, not barefoot like some kind of peasant. The whole aesthetic screamed, I'm about to ruin your day, but I'm going to look incredible doing it. Now here's where the timeline gets spicy. By the mid-1800s, Savate had spread beyond Paris. Marseille, Lyon, other major cities, everyone wanted a piece. But it wasn't just spreading geographically, it was spreading socially. Working class heroes were teaching aristocrats. Soldiers were learning it for military combat. Police were using it to handle street criminals, which is peak irony considering Savate started with those same street criminals. It became this weird cultural bridge where a dock worker could teach a count how to properly deliver a fouette kick, and both would walk away with mutual respect. Or concussions, sometimes both. But then reality came knocking, and by reality, I mean World War I. When you're stuck in a trench getting shelled by artillery, suddenly the art of graceful kicking seems less practical than, not dying. Savate took a massive hit during the war. Schools closed, masters died. The younger generation that would have carried the torch forward were too busy experiencing the trauma speedrun that was the Western Front. By the 1920s, Savate was on life support. It went from packed arenas and national pride to barely hanging on in a few scattered schools. The golden age was over, and it looked like Savate was going to become one of those, remember when France had that cool kicking thing? Footnotes in history. But here's the beautiful part about martial arts. They don't stay dead if people care enough. A guy named Count Pierre Baruzzi basically said, "Not on my watch," and spent decades working to revive Savate. He standardized techniques, created official ranking systems, wrote definitive texts on the art. He basically took Savate from a dying street art and turned it into a legitimate competitive sport, with rules, weight classes, and everything. By the 1960s and 70s, Savate was experiencing a renaissance. New schools opened, international competitions started happening. People who'd never heard of it were suddenly learning that French people invented a way to kick you that was both devastating and somehow elegant. The modern era of Savate is where it gets really interesting. It spread globally. You've got schools in the US, South America, Asia, even back in England where it all started with that boxing rivalry. The sport evolved too. You've got three main disciplines now. Assaut, which is basically sport savate, where you focus on technique and control. Combat, where you're actually trying to knock someone out like the old days. And can de combat, which is stick fighting that evolved alongside Savate because French people apparently needed another way to be dangerous while looking sophisticated. And the techniques? They've been refined over nearly 2 centuries. The chassé kick that can push someone back like they got hit by a car. The fouette that whips around faster than you can process. The reverse that comes from angles you didn't know existed. But what really sets Savate apart, what makes it special even now, is that original spirit. It's still elegant, still technical. You're not just learning to kick, you're learning to move, to think, to control distance and timing like you're conducting a violent orchestra. Modern saboteurs wear the same basic uniform their predecessors did. The tight jacket, the specialized shoes. They still emphasize that same philosophy Cassot preached back in 1825. That violence can have grace, that fighting can be an art, that you can knock someone out and still maintain your dignity. The competitive scene is thriving. World championships happen regularly. You've got fighters from dozens of countries competing at the highest levels. The techniques have been pressure tested against other martial arts in MMA and kickboxing, and Savate holds its own. Those kicks that started in Parisian alleyways, they still work. They work really well. The footwork that was developed to navigate narrow streets, perfect for controlling a ring. The emphasis on precision over wild aggression. Turns out that's just good fighting regardless of the era. And here's the thing that still amazes me. Savate survived. It survived wars, cultural shifts, the rise of other martial arts, decades of near extinction. It survived because people believed in it enough to keep it alive. From street thugs to counts to modern competitors, there's been this unbroken chain of people saying, "This matters, this is worth preserving." That's not just martial arts history, that's cultural survival. That's people refusing to let something beautiful and dangerous die just because times got hard. So yeah, Savate started with angry Frenchmen kicking each other in alleyways over pocket change. But it became something more. It became proof that even in the middle of chaos and violence, humans can create art. That we can take the worst impulses, anger, aggression, the desire to hurt, and transform them into something with rules, with beauty, with meaning. Every time a modern saboteur throws a perfect chassé kick, they're connected to every street fighter, every nobleman, every sailor who came before them. They're part of a story that's been written over 2 centuries in sweat, blood, and a whole lot of kicks. And if you ever find yourself in a narrow Parisian alley and someone in a tight jacket and fancy shoes asks if you want to dance, run, because that dance ends with you meeting the canvas, and the last thing you'll hear is them saying "désolé" as you fade to black. The old shoe is still kicking, and it's still as deadly as it ever was,